Well, good morning. Glad you're here today. If this is your first time here today or first time back in a while, we're in the middle of a series we've been calling Live Love. It's a series we kicked off several weeks ago, not just as a yearly theme, but as part of one of our core values as a church. And so to kick off the series, we talked about how we not only live from God's love, but we live in God's love and we live through His love. And then 2 weeks ago, we talked about how love is not just a feeling, but it's a verb. It's something that God wants us to become, for it to become part of our identity, a part of our core being. And then last week we talked about how we all need someone next to us. It's this idea in the scriptures about living in spiritual community, and we all need someone who is there next to us. Well, today I want to go back to the 90s, and not to the 1990s. I'm talking about like the original 90s, back to where a guy named the Apostle John, he wrote a letter. And in this letter, he's trying to remind his audience of that great command that Jesus gave. Do you remember the command? Jesus said, "A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another as I have loved you." And that's really the theme that goes through this letter that is found in our Bibles that we call 1 John. It's that one command that John just kind of puts on repeat, and he talks through it to help us better understand what Jesus actually meant. And he's going to spend some time fleshing that out. And what I find so fascinating about John's letter and about that command is the examples that he uses. We're going to be in 1 John chapter 3. If you want to join with me in your Bible, we'll also have the verses on the screen. John picks two examples, one from the Old Testament, the other one being Jesus. I find it really fascinating, this Old Testament character that he picks. It's a guy by the name of Cain. So we're going to pick up in verse 11. It says, "For this is the message you've heard from the beginning. We should love one another." Now, do you remember the name of the book of the Bible that's known as the book of the beginnings? Do you remember what book of the Bible that is? Genesis. Yeah, Genesis means the beginnings. And so he says all the way back. Do you remember we've heard it from the beginning, from the book of the beginnings. We've heard from the book of Genesis. We should love one another. I actually did a little word study this morning to find out how many times is the word love mentioned in Genesis. I believe it was 5 times, and none of those times come from God. It's never a message of God saying, "I love you." So how does John view the book of Genesis as a story of love? Because he reinterprets those early chapters of Genesis to be a story of love. So the next time you spend time in Genesis chapter 1, Genesis chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 4, those early chapters, John wants us to reread those and to reframe those as a story about love. Then he's going to contrast it. You know, love one another unlike Cain. You remember Cain? He was of the evil one. He murdered his brother. Not a good idea. Why did he murder him? Because his deeds were evil and his brothers were righteous. So he takes us all the way back to Genesis chapter 4. Remember, Adam and Eve have sinned. Part of their consequence to their rebellion is they've been exiled from the garden. They've been kicked out of the Garden of Eden, but they weren't kicked out of God's presence. He still loved them. He faithfully walked with them. And when you open up to Genesis chapter 4, Adam and Eve have a child. His name is Cain. And there's this little line about Cain's name where Eve says, "I have acquired a male child by the help of the Lord." And so that tells us what Cain's name means. His name means acquired. And then we meet his brother. We're going to assume a short time later, they have another son and they name him Abel. We're not told anything about his name, just his name was Abel. Now we know from Hebrew his name means vapor or breath. Now what's interesting in the Old Testament especially is that a name had to do with somebody's essence or their identity. They're kind of speaking in to that child what they were going to be, or maybe it was something that they did when they were born. And so Cain's name means acquired. Several years ago, I shared this story last Sunday when I was teaching on Cain in Genesis 4, not realizing I would not be able to finish that today because of next steps, because my brain just does weird things and I don't always see things clearly as I should. I didn't realize I had double booked myself. So I told this story last Sunday in the auditorium Bible class that several years ago I was doing a lesson on names, and as I was working on it, I thought, well, I don't know what my name means. So I called my mother one day and I said, "Hey Mom, I'm doing this lesson on names. What does my name mean? How did you guys come up with my name? Is there significance to it? Is there like a family member you were trying to honor?" And she was like, no, not really. We really like the name Jonathan. Jonathan is my middle name. I said, okay, well, why didn't you name me Jonathan? She said, well, when you were born, we just didn't feel like you were big enough to be a Jonathan. I said, I don't know what to do with that. I don't know how to handle that. So I shared this story last week, and Jonathan, who did announcements, I found out he was a 10-pound baby. So he was big enough to be a Jonathan. I was, I guess, in the neighborhood of 5 to 6 pounds based on my first name, Eric, is only half the letters of what I could have been. Either way, names are interesting, right? And so Cain's name means acquired. And what it's tied to, because as we read this story, a lot of times we will spend time thinking about the violent act that he committed, because in the course of time, they both bring this offering to the Lord. Cain brings the first offering, then Abel, his younger brother, brings an offering to the Lord. And it says in the story that God had regard for Abel's offering, but he did not have regard for Cain's offering. Cain becomes very downcast, his face gets long, what we would call pouting. He starts pouting, and God comes to him and says, what's wrong? Why is your face so long? Why are you downcast? Some translations say, why is your countenance fallen? Why are you so mad right now? Why are you angry? If you do well, will you not be accepted? That's interesting. If you do well, will you not be accepted? Well, God's giving him a choice, and he tells him sin's crouching at the door. It wants to rule over you, but you can rule over it. Well, he calls his brother Abel. He says, let's go out into the field. And he rises up and he strikes down his brother. He takes his life. And we spend a lot of time when we think about that story talking about the violent act that Cain committed. We spend a lot of time really conjecturing about why God regarded Abel's offering but didn't regard Cain's offering. And it's all an interesting conversation. What I find really fascinating is what John is doing here. He's connecting Cain to something, and he's going to use that to contrast Jesus. Now, Cain's name means to acquire. It's tied to his production. And there's something within Cain that finds his identity in being able to produce. And all of a sudden we see in Cain's life a fear of not producing, a fear of what he produced not good enough for God. And it causes him to act out of fear and take the life of his brother. Let me ask you this. Have you ever found yourself stressing out over not being able to produce enough, not being able to acquire enough? Maybe you're thinking about your retirement and you're looking at it and you're going, ooh, I'm really anxious because I don't know if we have enough to be able to live the rest of our life off of what we have saved up. Or maybe it's you're paying your bills and you realize, oh no, I don't think we're going to have enough to pay the bills at the end of the month. I don't think we're going to be able to cover it all. And it causes anxiety to set in. Or maybe it's a scenario where you know you need to help somebody, but there's this part of you that worries, well, if I help them, am I going to have enough for me? There's this part of us that we just struggle with being stingy, that there are times that we've all faced it. Now, when you were a little kid, you struggle with being stingy, right? You had a toy, and there was another child that wanted to play with your toy, and when they came over, what'd you do? You pulled it close, and you uttered that 4-letter word. What'd you say? Mine. Now, if you really want to find out how stingy your kids are, what you need to do is you need to make a dessert or go buy a dessert and then have one child cut the dessert for all the other children, and you'll find out exactly how stingy your kids are. Now, in the meantime, you should probably get on Amazon and order a WWE wrestling rink because it's going to result in a fight, and you may need to put some safety measures in place for the brawl that's going to take place, because all of a sudden now there's a fear that your slice is bigger than my slice and I'm not getting as much as them, because that's what it pulls out of us. It pulls out our selfishness. There are times that we struggle with being selfish, and as we get older, the toys just simply get more expensive. There's a little bit more on the line, but sometimes there's a part of us that likes to pull everything that we have within and we go, that's mine, and I don't know if I can share this right now. What John is going to do is he's going to connect that mentality to Cain. He goes on and he kind of sums up this story in Genesis 4, and he says, well, everybody who hates his brother or sister is a murderer. And you know that no murderer has eternal life residing in him. That's a big jump, right? Hate to murder. It's the connection Jesus made. Remember in the Sermon on the Mount, he said, do not murder. You've heard that said, but I'm telling you that anyone who hates a brother or sister is guilty of murder. Because if you really think about it, when you hate someone, what have you done to that person in your heart? You've robbed them of their humanity. You have basically murdered them in your heart to be able to get to the position where you can actually hate another human being. And so what John is going to get us to connect is that hatred is tied to murder, to living like Cain. But then he's going to present the contrast. And in verse 16, he says, now this is how we've come to know love. So we have hatred on the one side and murder. Now on the other side, we have love. And this is how we've come to know love. He laid down his life for us. The question is, who is the he? Because the he is not Cain. Cain did not lay down his life, did he? He rose up and he took life. So who laid down his life for us? Well, that would be who? Jesus. He's contrasting the story of Cain with the story of Jesus. And in Cain, we have a person who shows hatred that leads to murder, to taking life. And in the story of Jesus, we have love by Jesus laying down his life and giving his life for us. And John says that's how we've come to know love. Because when it was time for God to state his love, he didn't just say it, he demonstrated it. Do you remember Romans 5 verse 8? For God shows his love toward us in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. It's the greatest demonstration of love to ever be given. God wants you to know just how much he loves you. It's as far as the cross. It's the greatest extreme. That's how we know what love is. And then, if that wasn't enough, he's going to raise the stakes a little bit more. Because in the times that we're struggling with being stingy, and we're being stingy with our love, we're being stingy with our time, we're being stingy with our resources, we're being stingy with our money, he's going to really make a connection here. That's a big challenge for us. He says we should lay down our lives for our brothers and sisters. Okay, I can go with that. Jesus laid down his life for me. I should lay down my life for others. I mean, that makes sense. That's hard to do, right? What does he mean by lay down our life? Does he mean that I need to be willing to give up my life for you? I would if the situation called for that. But actually, he makes it more practical than that. And slightly, if we're honest, less heroic. Because if you laid down your life for somebody, that story is going to be remembered forever, at least for the next generation, right? But what he's going to get to is in these little day-to-day moments, opportunities to serve, that's truly laying down our life. And what it is it's me not pulling everything in and saying mine, but saying, what do you need? I'll do whatever. And so he makes a very practical analogy. If anybody has this world's goods and sees a fellow believer in need, but withholds compassion from him, how does God's love reside in that person? So here's kind of our big idea, because we're in this series called Live Love, and we've been talking about what it means to become love and to share our love together with one another. But there's also this idea about generosity. What does it mean to have a generous type of love? And if we want to be people who live love, then we got to have three things. We got to have open eyes, open hearts, and open hands. Let's talk about them individually. Let's start with opening eyes. It's about seeing someone. I love the Message translation says in 1 John 3, it's kind of like a great paraphrase. It says, this is how we ought to live sacrificially for our fellow believers and not just be out for ourselves. Isn't that kind of the message of culture? Just be out for yourself. Get yours. Do what you need to do. You got to look out for you first and foremost. But the message of the scriptures is don't just be out for yourselves. If you see a brother or sister in need and have the means to do something about it, but turn a cold shoulder and do nothing, what happens to God's love? It disappears. And you made it disappear. Man, that goes right after the heart, doesn't it? And so the first step in living love and living a generous type of love is checking our eyes. What are we seeing? Now, yeah, you came in here today and you all see one another unless you have some type of visual impairment, but you all see one another. But I think what John is trying to communicate here is a deeper type of sight. It's a sight that is in tune to the heart and not just visually looking out and going, oh, well, so-and-so is here and brother or sister so-and-so is here. I saw them today. Are we actually seeing one another? So a couple situations where we need to really pay attention to seeing. First off is seeing somebody who is new. Have you ever walked into a church and you were new there? Some of you are here today and you're new. You're newer to this church, or maybe it's even your first time here. It's a little bit anxious, regardless of your personality. Even if you're good with being around people, it's an anxious-filled moment. If you're the type of person who doesn't love being around people, it is a high anxiety type of moment. And so it's a responsibility of us who have been here a while to be looking out and to seeing people who are new and not just going and getting their name, but trying to make a connection and trying to make them feel comfortable. Last week after my lesson on sharing our lives with one another and being together, had someone come through that's recently become a part of the church family here that said, that was a real big challenge. That's really hard with us being new here. And I said, no. I wasn't as clear as I should have been. So I want to kind of restate what I should have said last week. If you're newer here, it's not on you to just be the one that reaches out. Here's how I've always believed and try to practice. If you've walked into this building today and you have no anxieties about where you're going to sit, who you're going to talk to, there's no reservation about are people going to be nice to me, you just walk in because you kind of feel at home. It is your responsibility to look out for those who don't feel that way yet. If you walk in, you're a little bit anxious, you're not sure what you're going to do, you're not sure if people are going to be nice to you, you're not sure who you're going to sit with, who's going to talk to you, you haven't made those strong connections yet, it's not on you yet. It's not on you yet. Once you get to that point, it will be your turn to give it back and to pay it forward. But it's the responsibility of those of us who are here that are comfortable to have a different set of eyes that looks out and goes, it's my responsibility to help somebody else feel comfortable. That's a challenge to those of us who feel comfortable to help somebody who doesn't feel that way to become that way. But it's also not just seeing people who are new, but seeing people that are discouraged. And that gets really hard because it can be easy to notice somebody who's newer, but it's harder to notice somebody who's discouraged because I doubt they walked in wearing a sign that says, I'm discouraged. That'd probably be a little bit helpful, shouldn't it? We put on like those name tags, hi, my name is discouraged, and we just put our emotion for that day, but we don't do that, and that'd be really awkward, I think. Would you agree? So how do you see somebody that's discouraged? Well, now you're trying to pay attention to body language. You're not just listening to what they're saying, but you're really trying to understand on a deeper level. And you replay that conversation, and you're trying to pick up on cues. Because if we're discouraged, a lot of times we're kind of sending out small smoke signals to let somebody know something's not right. But I'm not just going to walk in and go, hey, I'm discouraged today, and I need you to pick me up. But I might give some cues about something that's going on in my life or in my heart. And we've all got to challenge ourselves to see a little bit deeper. Somebody who's struggling spiritually, maybe they've missed a couple of weeks. Some things are going on. They're feeling disconnected, feeling distant from God. It's about paying attention and looking and saying, I haven't seen that person, so I need to make sure that I reach out to them. I encourage them. Somebody who's physically sick and going through a battle with their health, it's about seeing them, making sure they're known. Our shut-ins, our elderly who can feel disconnected and distant. We see them. We say, I love you, and I'm so thankful you're part of the family of faith, and I want you to be seen. We've got to have open eyes. The second one is open hearts. Have you ever watched a movie, and as you're watching the movie, all of a sudden you begin to experience the emotions of the movie, and the person sitting beside you says, are you crying? And you're like, mind your own business. It's cold in here. My eyes are watering. There are two movies that get me every time, and I've seen them many times, and every time they get me. The first one is My Girl, all the way back. Remember that early 1990s movie, My Girl? Every time the kid is near the beehive, like, just leave the bees alone, man. Get away from it. And every time it just, it's about to get me right now, just thinking about it, picturing it. The second one is Armageddon. I know that's an older movie, but man, when Bruce Willis is on that rock and he is video messaging his daughter saying, I'm not coming home, and oh my word, you just get me in a puddle of tears. I mean, every time. I hadn't seen it in a long time, but what's happening in that moment? What's happening is you are picturing yourself in the movie. You are picturing yourself as the individual that's experiencing these emotions, and you're seeing your life from their perspective, and it gets the best of you, and all of a sudden you begin to feel these emotions, whether it's sadness and tears roll or excitement, and all of a sudden you're in the middle of the theater and something big happens, you're like, yeah, and nobody else says anything, and it's kind of embarrassing. You're so caught up in the moment because you're picturing yourself in their shoes. Do you know what that's called? Compassion. That's called compassion. It's picturing your life in the shoes of another individual. The ESV, English Standard Version, in this verse of 1 John 3 says, when you see a brother or sister in need, yet you close your heart up against them. That's a great wording, close your heart. King James and other older translations talk about the bowels of the heart. Because in the ancient time, they believed that compassion and love and different emotions originated in the belly. That's why we have the term gut-wrenching pain, where it literally gets your stomach, not literally, I shouldn't say literally, it's not literal. It figuratively gets your stomach in knots. It's already in knots, it's called your intestines, right? But it gets your stomach in knots to where you're feeling an emotion, and the ancients believed that's where your emotions originated. Now, we know it all happens in the mind, but we even still use the phrase, the heart. You're not giving enough heart, you got to give me more heart. They gave it all their heart. Well, it's not literally giving that muscle in your chest. It's all in the mind, but it's tied together biblically. It's about your desires. And what happens when I see somebody in need? What happens when I see somebody new? What happens when I see somebody who's discouraged? I notice somebody who is in need financially or spiritually. What happens? Well, I have one of two choices. I can close my heart and say, not my problem. Or I can open my heart and I can try to step into their shoes and think about what would it be like if I were new? What would it be like if I were discouraged? What would it be like if I was struggling spiritually, or if I was in the hospital, or if I was shut in at my house? What would I want someone to do for me? That's what it means to have compassion. It's seeing your life from someone else's perspective. And what that leads to is open hands. This has become one of my favorite analogies in talking about generosity. It's something I try to regularly remind myself of, because here's what I know about me. I don't know if this is true about you. I just know it about me. I can be selfish. And I like to think about everything that God has gifted to me as sitting in my hands, whether it be everything that I own, my job, my influence, my relationship to my children, my marriage, whatever it is that God, because they are all gifts from God. My relationships with each of you, they are all gifts from God. And I like to picture those sitting in the palm of my hand as though God has gifted it to me. And what I find myself so often wanting to do is close my hands over it and go, that's mine. And then the Holy Spirit convicts and pries my hands back open to remind me it's not mine. It's His. Because if it's His, He's free to take it whenever He chooses. He's free to use whatever I have that's been gifted to me from Him for His glory. And so if it's a situation where I need to financially give, it's yours anyways, God. You're going to work it out however you want to. And I don't have to worry about, like Cain, of do I have enough? Have I stored up enough? Do I have enough for me? If I trust God, when He calls me to give, He's going to take care of it, right? It's His. God, that's my relationships, that's my influence, that's my ability, no, it's not mine, it's His. Open up your hands and allow God to freely use whatever He has gifted to you. I think it's one of the greatest analogies and images that we can think about when it comes to generosity. And so when you see the person who's in physical need, sometimes I've been guilty of closing up my heart while sitting on a wallet with cash in it. Shame on me. It's not mine, it's God. It's His. And He put me in that place to be able to meet the need for that opportunity. It's about whether or not I'm going to open my heart and open my hands. What's so fascinating is that when I close my heart, you know what I also close? My hands. Because I say that's mine, when really it's His. So here's what I want to close with. This is what Camden read to us. He read it out of the Christian Standard Version. I love how the Message words it. It says, my dear children, let's not just talk about love. Let's practice real love. People who have open eyes, open hearts, and open hands. So here's how you can apply this message. 3 ways, 3 opportunities. First off, tonight, I want to invite you back at 6 o'clock for our evening service. It's going to be a little bit different tonight because tonight, with it being a 5th Sunday today, tonight we are going to have something that we're calling Go Night. What is Go Night? Well, it's going to be an opportunity where, maybe you go somewhere, but very likely you're just not going to be sitting in a row doing what we normally do. We're going to do something. We're going to encourage people. So we're going to spend some time writing some cards, praying for some people, maybe even making some phone calls for those who might be sick, or maybe we've missed for a little while, or maybe somebody you know just needs some encouragement. Maybe you can call them and spend some time in prayer. Going to maybe even be an opportunity to send a group or 2 out to just go make a couple of quick visits to some of our folks who are shut in right now. Could be an opportunity if you say, you know what, God's kind of laid on my heart, I'd like to make something for somebody. Then whatever it is, just bring it, and we'll figure it out when we get here. And you say, well, I'm going to bring couple of sleeves of cookies. That's awesome. We got a kitchen. We'll throw them in the oven. We'll put those goodie bags together. We've got some different ideas that we've got set up, but also want God to work on your heart and to inspire you to do something tonight. So bring that with you. That's an opportunity for you to live out this lesson in a very real way, okay? The second one is this week. I want to challenge you this week to find a way to bless somebody else in a way that maybe you don't normally, or maybe you haven't in a while, a way that you can see someone who is in need, open your heart, and therefore open your hand. So a couple of ways that you can do that. First off, you could make a meal for somebody who's been sick. Just make it and deliver it. Don't call them and ask them if they need it, because a lot of times we are so stubborn, we'll say, no, I got it. Just do it anyways. They're not going to be mad. Just take it. It's going to be a gift of generosity. Maybe you could go pay a visit to one of our shut-ins and one of our elderly, spend some time with them. You know somebody that's struggling financially, just pay their bill. If you've got extra and you live with some margin, just take care of that. Cut a check, send cash anonymously, put it at their house, do whatever you need to do. Call the power company, just find a way to help them as they're struggling financially. Give somebody a ride to the doctor's office. Deliver groceries to somebody that you know that's in need. Make a little goodie bag with a bottle of water, put it in your car for the next time you see somebody that's asking for help on the side of the road, and you can gift to them some food, maybe a gift card in it to a local fast food restaurant, whatever God's going to lead you to do there. Could be somebody needs some help with some yard work, raking some leaves. One of your neighbors that's working on a project, and you've got the time, you've got the ability, the resources, and you can walk over and say, hey, what you doing? Can I help? And you gift to them your time. Call somebody this week that you know that's been struggling spiritually, emotionally, physically. Just pray for them. Do you know you can pray over the phone? You can. You don't have to be in the same place. You don't even have to close your eyes to pray. You can do that while you're driving. And you can pray with that person over the phone. So that rather than telling them, hey, I'll pray for you this week, you can do that right then. And it will bind the two of you together for a long time in a special way. Now, third way you can apply this lesson, and this one's coming down the road, but not far. It'll be here before we know it. The first week of April, and a couple other weeks throughout the year, but the first one will be the first week of April. Our church has partnered with Family Promise. Family Promise is an organization that blesses our community, where they provide assistance for families who are experiencing a displacement. And there's churches all around Baldwin County that open up their buildings that allow these families to come in for 1 week and to stay so that they know that they have a roof over their head. And we've partnered with Family Promise. In the first week of April, we're opening up our building for up to 4 families to come to spend that week so that they have somewhere to stay in a building that's heated and cooled, that's out of the elements. And that's going to require a lot of volunteer effort as we provide meals each evening and breakfast items in the morning. There's going to be plenty of opportunities to serve. We've got a training coming up on February the 26th at 4:30 in the afternoon for anybody who's going to be involved in that effort. And that is an opportunity for you to share a generous type love, even if all it is you're helping pay for a meal, or you're coming up and you're cooking it, or you're just coming up just to meet people and to engage in relationships, to build a connection, to show them the love of Jesus, or you volunteer to stay overnight and say, I'll stay in the building. It's not haunted, I promise. You just volunteer to stay in the building, and I'll sleep on an air mattress for a night so that I can be here just in case somebody needs something, or something goes off in the building, a fire alarm or something like that, just to be present. Whatever God is calling you to do, we're going to have many opportunities to serve going forward, and to serve those who are in a tremendous need. To live out what John wrote in 1 John 3, love one another as I have loved you. How do you do that? You see them, open eyes, open hearts, and open hands. Above all, we want you to experience the love of God. And we want you to be people who share the love of God with others. As God leads you through life and places people right in front of you, for you to see them, to feel what they're going through, and to share with them the love and generosity that God has blessed you with. If you're here this morning and you're ready to receive the love of God into your life, to become a follower of Jesus, and you're ready to be baptized into Christ, man, we'd love to celebrate that and to witness that today, and to gather around you and to welcome you into the family of God. If you feel like God has been working on your heart this morning and this week and this month, and you know that there's some things in your life that you need to fix, some things that you need to surrender to Him, and you want to spend some time in prayer, I encourage you to do that. Our shepherds are going to be up front and in the back. If you want them to pray over you, if you want us to pray over you as a church family, we'd be happy to do that. If there's anything that we can help you with, we want to see you this morning and to help you as we stand and sing.